Good evening. We're going to be talking about the Revelation series, session 4, done by Ray Tinsman. During this series, I've been attempting to understand the theology of the COGR a little bit better. And as I have studied to this point, I really haven't encountered anything that has helped me to see that their points are particularly valid. We're going to be looking at a number of things that Ray says this evening. And I think that there's room for some good discussion because he says some things that certainly are questionable, at least in my mind. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to open with a slide where Ray talks about the fact that he believes that he can see himself, or they can see themselves on a first name basis in the book of Revelation.
And in many ways is maybe even more relevant, in a sense, if you can understand what I'm saying, more relevant to us than any other time in history. Now, I love the prophets. I love them dearly, but they had to look out and talk about another place and another time and another people other than themselves. And brother, there's something beautiful when you find yourself in the scriptures and when you read what the prophets have said before, and you're not looking at another place or another time or another people, but you read that and say, oh, yes, I see that. We can put first names to a lot of the scriptures. Isn't that beautiful? Now that's beautiful. And I love the scriptures.
I like watching the police shows, the YouTube police shows, because as you're watching, you watch people tell you that they haven't been doing this or that or the other, and inevitably it turns out that every word that has come out of their mouth is somewhat questionable. And for some time, I was really investigating with some diligence to try to understand these claims. But I find myself at the point now where I'm asking, what evidence does Ray have? Is there any scripture that points to the things that Ray is saying being true? And if they aren't true, then what does that actually mean? So what do you guys think about that?
I think the reality...
Ben, I'm curious.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Ben, I'm just curious to know, were they preaching about this when you were still with them, or is this a really recent?
Yeah, definitely. The Revelation was pretty thoroughly preached. They were holding Revelation meetings before my time. It was one of the things early on that we learned about to sort of set the hook when we were fairly new members. They sent Steve Hargrave up to Alaska to teach us the Revelation. And I found it quite fascinating because I'd never really heard anyone confidently work their way through Revelation. And then I guess what was convincing to me at the time, and maybe the way that they would answer your question, Lee, is that they would, compare the scripture to the scripture. So they take the symbolic book and they look back, and he does that in this sermon, and interpret it that way. And try to find that gives them a lot of leeway. I think it's really fascinating to see. They're not the only ones that do this, of course, but the broad way that you can deal with the scripture, if you give yourself a lot of slack with symbolism, with history, with the way you're counting dates, with the way you're using original languages, there's enough slack in all of those different methods of interpretation that you can just about land anywhere you want to and almost make it say anything you want it to. And I think that their interpretation here is backwards engineered. I think they're looking for themselves in the scripture, and that they obviously inherited this interpretation from D.S. Warner. Historically, this came down to them, and then subsequent generations have tweaked it. Brother Danny updated it. Ray has updated it to correct the chronological mistakes that they've made in the past, and to emphasize the things that the current doctrines are emphasizing, which I think is just a demonstration of what I said, that you can you can play pretty fast and loose with it, and it's a kind of art, which I enjoy watching.
It's interesting how you describe it as a piece of art. It's like they've taken this book and just made some fantasy land with it and implanted themselves within that. And then, of course, with that comes them being kings and wearing crowns and ruling. And unless they can find themselves in the book of Revelation, then that negates their position as the end time apostles and the judges right now wearing crowns and ruling the world or judging the world.
Yeah, it's such a ambiguous book, I guess, because it is so symbolic. It lends itself to interpretation.
One of the, when you're new to something and you don't know enough to stop and write something down. And I was listening to Steve Hargrave one time, and he said that the rest of the Bible is so ambiguous and you can just kind of mess with it however you do. But the book of Revelation is so solid, and they're able to work with that. And I thought, you got that exactly 180 degrees wrong, because the rest of the scripture is indeed pretty solid. And it's only in Revelation that you get into the having to interpret what is being said. And then you'd want to go back to Daniel, and you'd want to use the rest of the Old Testament to understand it. But when people are talking about the book of Revelation, or for that matter, the rest of the New Testament, one of the things that they would say, at least if they were a serious scholar, they would say would be that the book of Revelation, or the interpretation of the book of Revelation, would have to make sense to the people to whom it was first written. Otherwise, it has no real value, and it would have had no value for 2,000 years. And I think that's ultimately very true. Were somebody from the first century to be sitting on a bench in Warsaw or on a bench in Greenville, as I've heard John was, then they wouldn't have a clue, because it wouldn't fit into what was going on in their ethos. So
historically, the book is, y'all, I'm curious what y'all's opinion is. My understanding is that it's an apocalyptic piece of literature from the 1st or 2nd century, kind of in the vein of the Essenes, the Dead Sea Scroll community, probably.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that the language is their own symbolic, is filled with their own symbolic encoding, right? That it's not a straightforward literal book, but it's symbolic in the way Daniel and other apocalyptic books are, right?
Yeah. It was ostensibly, and I think likely, written by John in the 80s of the 90s AD. And it is apocalyptic. It uses language in a very special way. And it goes back to the Old Testament, and uses the Old Testament to explain the predictions for the future. So you have to know the Old Testament, and you have to have some sense of where the original readers would be when they were hearing that, I think. So
are you, question to both of you, what's your interpretation of it broadly? Are you preterists? Do you think that he's talking probably about things that are shortly to come to pass, or the Roman Empire?
Yeah. I think that I am a preterist to a large degree. I'm not a historicist, and the COGR is historicist. And the reason for that, I used to belong to the Advent Christian Church a million years ago, and they were strongly historicist. And I have read their commentaries and their explanations. And when they were writing what they were writing, it was back towards World War II and just prior to that. And they had very specific takes for all the things that were going on. So what happens when you're a historicist is you look around you and you go, oh, well, how does this fit the book of Revelation? And you begin plugging things in. And ultimately, it turns out that none of them were true to start with. It's too flexible, because what you're saying is, oh, okay, I need this. And you start looking through historical documents to see if you can find something that resembles that.
Mhm.
So I'm not much of a historicist. The futurist thing I think came in with Darby and the Scofield Bible. So I'm not really much of a futurist either. I'm certainly am an idealist, and those are the four categories I'm sure you know. You have idealism, historicism, the preterism, and the one that historicism, I guess. I may not have got them all in there, but I think I may have. But at any rate, so I'm more of a preterist with an idealist vein running through. I don't think Ray has done justice. I don't think the COGR has done justice to the scripture.
So that the beast, the Antichrist, would probably be like Nero or some sort of fairly local and in the same time frame kind of.
It could have been. It could have been. Or also,
Go ahead, Lee.
this is too complex to go off the rails here, I think, because there's a lot of idealism there, and there's a story that goes on which basically says that when men get together, they become increasingly evil, and then a beast, a dragon, whatever, rises out of that, and then you have this collapse. So you have cyclical events going through history. So rather than seeing it as one piece directed towards an end, you can almost see that as civilizations come and civilizations go.
Types.
So.
And I share that same view, the preterist. But Lee, I want to mention here, maybe we should, or I will attach this at the end somehow. You sent me a link to 2 videos. I don't know if you remember, probably not. It was about Revelation, someone's view on Revelation, and they created 2 nice videos about it. I'll speak with you at the end, and then maybe I'll put those in at the end of the at the end of the video for viewers.
I know what you're talking about. That was the Bible Project.
Links to the Revelation videos are in the description box.
Disappointment is a bitter pill to swallow, paying back the hope I borrowed from someone I never knew. It's a forfeit, humans in the suits of heroes, undressed by whispered conspiracies, in quest for the truth. But if the truth is what you're looking for, you don't get to choose the answers anymore. So tell me, do you really still believe that the truth will set you free? I do. Someday, well, if the truth is what I'm looking for, I don't get to choose the answers anymore. So tell me, do I really still believe that the truth will set